So today we're going to do an assessment on a Triumph TR6. Let's get going. So you spoke in the comment section, and I'm going to be delivering here. Now, I'm not anywhere near as knowledgeable about the TR6 as I am, say, an MGB or even an MGA, because I don't see nearly as many of these come through the shop as I do those, but I'll do the best I can here. What we have here is a 76 model in racing green. It is not wearing its original paint. This looks like a what I would call a budget respray, more like a Mako level, maybe just above paint job, bit of dirt in it, not super high quality, and some flaws that are really starting to show up now that it's been a while since it's been painted. But overall, external appearance, it looks like a pretty straight, solid car that doesn't have any obvious signs of any major rust repair. The overriders have been taken off of it, which I won't fault them for that. Some people really don't like them and prefer to not have them. So yeah, it is what it is. So now that we got the bonnet up, we can take a look underneath here and we can see that it is a little bit dirty. It's not exactly a show car. It's a driver quality car. Could use some detailing and some cleaning up to make it a little bit nicer. I don't know if the guy wants to do that at some point or not. He never said anything about that. But I went ahead and stuck a decent battery in it just to start it up, verify what I already knew, that the alternator is junk on this thing, and yes it is. That alternator is 2 years only. If it's TR6 and apparently nothing else, and there's not a whole lot of them to be had right now in the country, and I found one in New York, and we'll have it here early next week, so I can put that on next week. But for now, we're going to finish the inspection. After starting it up, it starts really easy on the key with no choke, which is a really good sign that everything is adjusted way too rich. And yes, it runs too rich. Probably to compensate for the fact that there was no oil in the dash pots, which of course there was no oil in it. The Strombergs, almost everyone that comes into my shop has no oil in it because it needs the O-rings like they all do at some point in time. This one at some point has been switched to silicone brake fluid, and one of the real telltale signs, easy ones to spot about it being painted, is look at all the overspray all over the steering shaft where they didn't tape that off. Of course, I can always tell when a car's been painted because I grew up in a body shop and I know exactly what I'm looking for. So in this case, the wheels and the trim rings and everything all look pretty nice on this car, and the center caps. So that's a good plus. A lot of the cars I see come into my shop, they don't look that nice. So that's a good point to say. And it's got all its trims in place here. Nothing's missing or dented up real bad. Now, one other reason why I call this a budget respray, other than the little flaws that I can see in the dirt, is they didn't put the decals back on. That's one of the signs of what I would call a budget respray. It does have a black interior in reasonably decent condition. Now, he did knock the front spoiler off of this thing, loading it on the trailer, but lucky for him, it had just plastic bolts holding it on, so he didn't actually damage the spoiler. So that'll make it nice and easy to put that back on. And the wood on this dash is starting to fade a little bit, so this car has been out in the sun a bit, and this shows that too, which I'm going to guess that's probably why it got repainted at some point. It might have been out west somewhere at some point in time, or just been left outside for a while and got kind of weather beaten on the paint. So now, before we actually put it up in the air, I'm going to say these cars are body on chassis cars, But you kind of need to think of these as kind of hybrids, because it's not quite like a traditional body on chassis car, because the chassis on these things are not very torsionally rigid. They're not made of very heavy materials, and they do require the rockers to be solid to keep scuttle shake down. But these are always going to have more scuttle shake, even when they're perfect, than say an MGB will. Now I have not put this car up in the air yet, so let's get it up in the air and look at the bottom side. So now we got the car up in the air, we can take a look at what we got underneath here. Looks like at some point it's had a bit of suspension work done to it. Got some new pivots here, pivot pins, tie rods, and some other hardware and probably bushings, and the shocks here, they're date coded 09, so all this work was probably done in 09, maybe 2010 range. So, and the looks like the caliper was replaced probably then too. They didn't paint it, so it's starting to show a little bit of surface rust. But apparently they decided not to do brake hoses, and I would have done those at that point in time because those look old enough. Now we see rubbing here. The tires on this thing are a 205/65, which is really pushing the limits of width on these. They came with like what they came with would have been more equivalent to say a 185/70. So that's pushing the width of the tire, so you're going to get a little rubbing on full lock like he's getting. And these tires are actually getting a bit old. Let's see if we got our date code. Where's our date code again? 0113. That's January of 2013. So they're 11 years old. They're in amazingly good shape. Don't see any visible cracking, and very little wear, so this car's probably sat on an awful lot since then. So these are probably not very smooth on the road. Now these chassis, like I said before, are not super strong chassis. I've got my sheet metal gauge here. I've always heard that these were really thin. I've known they're thin, but I've never tested one before. And after putting it on here, it actually checks to be about a 16 gauge each. Well, that's not a good spot because there's not an overlap there, but it's about 16 gauge. So yes, these are not that strong. So they do have some flex to them, and it doesn't take a ton of rust. You know, they won't take the kind of rust that heavier ones will before being compromised. And these chassis are very expensive to replace. You can buy them. They're about $10,000 roughly last time I checked. But this one overall looks to be in pretty decent shape. Now, one of the other things that can happen, the last one I had in here had been hit in the front end at one time, but not that hard. But it doesn't take that hard of a hit here for this to bend back into here and really throw off all your suspension geometry if it's not fixed correctly. And that one wasn't. Now we got our obligatory oil leak on the oil pan. I mean, every British car has to have that, doesn't it? And the transmission, I think that's almost a mandate anymore, isn't it? If they're not leaking, you're supposed to make them, aren't you? But it's got a stainless exhaust, at least from the manifold back to here, but not from here back. And it does have an exhaust leak back there, so we'll have to take a closer look at that. Now, my understanding, I think they can rust right in this area in here a little bit. I know the TR3 can. I'm not 100% sure on the TR6 how big of a deal that is, but I do know on the TR6, these can rust. And I'll show you on the other side there, they start to expand out, and show you on the other side there where this one's just starting to do it. But we do have a little bit of rust right here. And I don't consider that too bad, considering with me having the body experience that I do, looking at the outside of the car, I would have expected to see this or possibly even worse under here. That wouldn't bother me too much at the price point this car would be at. That's fully expected, and this car completely can be usable for many years to come if it's not driven in the rain. And we do have missing boots on ball joints on both sides of the front suspension. Forgot to point that out when we were up here before. Told you I would show you the back side of this here. See where that right there is just starting to expand out a little bit and bulge with rust. That's what they'll do, and then they'll get worse and worse and worse. This actual section is one of the sections that's in the catalog that's readily available because it is a common rust point. Now this thing does have adjustable mounts put on it here, which is a good thing. Helps you dial in the suspension. And interestingly enough, it's had rear hoses put on. It's usually the rear brake hoses that get forgotten and the front ones replaced. In this case, the rear was replaced and the front was forgotten. Now, one of the big things that I've always heard for many, many years, and I've seen before, the big thing you got to watch out for rust on these is the rear suspension area here. This cross member crossed here where the differential mounts, and along rails here where they all come together here, and the front differential mount here. You want to make sure all that stuff's in good condition if you're looking to buy one of these things. While all that stuff is repairable, it is a lot of labor to repair them because you got to take the body off the chassis to do it properly. Now, one of the other things you want to look at is the U-joints. You got U-joints here and out here, and if these things get tight or sloppy, they can start causing a vibration in the drivetrain, just like with the drive shaft, but it'll be a totally different feel than the drive shaft. But that is one of the things that can go wrong here, and it's fairly labor intensive because you have to take this whole suspension out, the whole trailing arm, to get this out of the hub and replace it. And then you want to check the wheel bearings here too. They can get a bit loose. That's got a little bit of movement, and so does that one. Now, he said there was an exhaust leak on this thing, and well, obviously we got one right there. At some point it looks like that was brazed together, and the brazing is broke on both pipes. Plus, you can see somebody brazed the heck out of this trying to make it last a little longer. So it does need a new muffler. Oh heck, that's a factory muffler. It's dated 1175. And it's got the British Lighting stamp on it right there. And it doesn't look much better over here as it's all rusted out around here. So he is going to need a new muffler on this thing. Now I did bounce the car before I put it up, and the rear shocks are kind of, getting close.